Have you ever carried that quiet, stubborn sense that your life is slipping away unused? You keep yourself occupied, immersed in people, objectives, schedules, and duties, yet beneath all the activity, something vital still seems absent. It feels as though you are only getting by existing, rather than actually living with intention. You might have tried to label this state as anxiety, or perhaps a clinician named it depression and offered medication to mute the unease, one tablet, with the sunrise another before bed. Days and weeks then pass, gradually dulling precisely the message you most urgently need to hear. Feeling like you're just getting by instead of living on purpose. Comment 1 if you've ever muted an inner warning just to keep functioning. Comment 2 if you've already taken one brave step to hear it. If you feel these psychology sharings are helpful and relatable, you're welcome to become a channel member and stay with us on a deeper journey. As a member, you'll get early and extended access to more in-depth practical content that you can apply in everyday life. But consider this. What if this very suffering were not an accident at all? What if it were not a symptom to be smothered, but a summons you are meant to answer? Carl Jung, a central figure in depth psychology, argued that what we commonly label as mental disorder is frequently not mere disease. Rather, it can be the psyche's own effort to restore balance. It is a signal that the life you are leading no longer serves the needs of your soul. Perhaps you are trapped in a routine handed to you by others, bound to work, that exhausts you, caught in relationships that sap your strength, chasing ambitions that never truly belong to you. All the while, your deepest self cries out for release. Yet, no one taught you to hear that cry. On the contrary, you were trained to quiet it, to perform a just fit-in, and avoid disruption. Thus, illness takes root in silence, even as the world rewards and celebrates your relentless productivity. This is precisely where Jung's contribution becomes crucial. For him, genuine healing does not arise from avoidance or denial, but from a courageous descent into what hurts. The task is not to cover the symptoms. It is to discern the message they carry. As Jung put it, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In practical terms, this means the ailment persists because you are fleeing the very pain that, if faced, could catalyze real change in your life. So long as you keep escaping, the cycle of suffering will continue unbroken. This message is not designed for anyone seeking diversion or easy escape. It speaks to those exhausted by pretense, to people who sense they are going under, yet still guard a small but resilient hope that a path exists. That path does exist, but it begins with a stark, uncompromising choice. Cease the flight and begin to listen. Listen to your own inner voice, to the unconscious that whispers beneath awareness, and to the pain you attempted to mute with pills, compulsions, and the comfort of rigid routines. If you have followed the argument to this point, you may recognize that the emptiness you sense is not a personal flaw. It is the mark of your own absence from the life you are living. And acknowledging that absence is the moment to begin altering course. Imagine the familiar scene. Sadness lingers for days, then stretches into weeks and perhaps months. You schedule an appointment. The practitioner listens perhaps for 15 minutes, perhaps less. You describe the sleepless nights, the racing unease, that inexplicable pressure in your chest, and the persistent sense of not belonging in your own life. He nods, enters notes on a screen, and delivers a swift conclusion. It's anxiety. We'll begin this medication. And just like that, within days or weeks, your anguish is reframed as a mere chemical discrepancy. What began as an existential outcry is compressed into a dosage line on a printed label. What is rarely acknowledged is that such an approach does not concern itself with your inner life. It prioritizes your ability to function. The rationale is straightforward. You must continue working, consuming, producing, keeping the machinery of everyday life in motion. Medication enables you to tolerate what once felt intolerable, which is precisely why it is presented as a decisive fix. Yet, as Jung warned, this supposed fix can become a snare that conceals rather than resolves the deeper conflict. Jung maintained that many contemporary neuroses stem not primarily from a defect inside the brain, but from a fracture between the existence we maintain and the one we are called to live. When you neglect your vocation, your most genuine impulses and inner truths, the soul falters. Lacking a literal tongue, it communicates through body and mind, manifesting as anxiety surges of panic and a bleak loss of hope. Yet rather than heeding that communication, we are conditioned to hush it, to chemically neutralize discomfort, and hurry back to a narrow definition of normal as fast as possible. But what precisely is this so-called normal? It often resembles a position you despise yet dare not leave. Surface-level relationships that exist to preserve appearances, hollow objectives, and habitual routines that keep you in survival mode, rather than fully alive. The anxiety rising within you is not proof of failure. It is the soul's insistence this life does not belong to you. You are betraying what matters. Ignore that message long enough, and the body amplifies the alarm. Still, the system stands by with another dosage, another diagnostic label, another sedative. The more thoroughly you conform to this pattern, the farther you drift from yourself until sensation itself goes flat. No true pain, no genuine pleasure, only a persistent numbness. Many mistake for the inevitability of adult life. Jung cautioned that treating symptoms while ignoring their source manufactures only the appearance of recovery. Outwardly, the individual may seem improved, yet inwardly remains disoriented. Over time, the gap between inner experience and outer behavior widens, setting the stage for a more dramatic breakdown. One cannot outrun the soul indefinitely. Eventually, it exacts its cost, perhaps as burnout, sudden emotional crashes, or a hollow emptiness that nothing, absolutely nothing, is capable of satisfying. This widespread medicalization mirrors a deeper cultural condition we have forgotten how to engage with suffering and grown afraid of pain because we no longer recognize its potential to transform. For Jung, suffering had purpose. It marked the threshold of the path, the summons to individuation. In contrast, contemporary life tends to classify nearly any discomfort as pathology. By running from suffering, we also run from the opportunity to grow into the person we are meant to become. When pain knocks, do you open the door or turn up the noise? Comment 1. If you faced a hard truth that changed you. Comment 2. If you still tend to numb out or avoid. The remaining question is, sobering, how many individuals are being quieted by interventions that only disguise the core issue? How many lives are slowly drained in the pursuit of an artificial stability? And how many personal journeys have been cut short, halted, before they even truly began addressing this question? We must examine the forces beneath contemporary emotional breakdowns. This naturally directs us to the next theme: the surrounding environment, the cultural frameworks that mold our identities, and the everyday lifestyle that in many cases functions as the real sickness. In other words, the issue may never have been you personally, but a world that gradually trained you to turn against yourself. We will explore this more carefully in the following section. Have you ever paused to consider why emotional suffering has become so widespread, even amid material comforts, advanced technology, and what appear to be expanded freedoms? We possess unprecedented access to information, amusement, and constant stimulation. Paradoxically, we have never felt more estranged from our own inner lives. The source of today's psychological pain is not confined to the mind alone. It is embedded in the very environment that shapes us from the moment we are born. Carl Jung recognized this with striking clarity. In his view, the difficulty was not merely personal, it was cultural and profoundly structural. Ours is a society that exalts appearances while disregarding essence, that prizes efficiency, yet overlooks the soul. From childhood, we are guided into a standardized script study: hard select, a safe career stay, productive consume without pause, smile for the camera, and conceal any trace of vulnerability. We are trained to please, to compete, to achieve victory. Yet almost no one instructs us in listening to intuition, discerning our emotions, or asking the fundamental question of what renders my life worth living. This vacuum of meaning is not accidental. It is cultivated. We are conditioned to locate identity in external markers, job titles, income brackets, and the approval we manage to collect. Jung understood this as a dangerous snare, because once your self-worth is tethered to outside standards, you are continually vulnerable to frustration, and more gravely, you drift away from your inner nature, from the unconscious, from the soul itself. There, in that widening gap, the emptiness starts to take root and expand. Gradually, silently, it infiltrates your daily routine. You fulfill expectations, complete every item on the checklist, and nonetheless feel misaligned, as though inhabiting someone else's life. You sense that something fundamental is off, yet words fail to name it. This sensation is not weakness. It is disconnection. It is estrangement from what is true, spontaneous, and instinctive. According to Jung, this very disconnection feeds our most profound psychological disturbances. And mainstream society has little interest in your recognizing this, because individuals kept disconnected are more easily controlled. They tend to consume more, question less, and comply without resistance. They are useful, docile, predictable. When such people eventually collapse, when anxiety, depression, or burnout strikes with force, the system replies with palliatives rather than truth. Jung argued that authentic healing requires confronting the very world that inflicted the wound. One must uncover the mechanisms of conditioning, identify what was repressed, and recognize what was sacrificed merely to gain acceptance. This is a difficult undertaking because it requires acknowledging that you have been living a life not truly your own. It demands admitting that you bent yourself into a constricting mold, domesticated by a culture that mistrusts the depth of the human soul. Yet this admission is also the sole path to freedom. Only by locating the origin of your emptiness can you begin to replace it with what is true. This path bears a name: individuation, the profound, transformative process Jung regarded as the genuine route to healing. In the next section, we will explore this journey in depth. What does individuation truly entail? How can one integrate the neglected parts of the self and at last construct a life with meaning? The response calls for courage, but also for surrender. Let us continue. Inevitably, there arrives a moment when pain refuses to be ignored, when the social mask grows unbearably heavy, and when you recognize that you are living as a half version of yourself, or worse, a caricature. At that breaking point, Carl Jung maintained the most consequential journey a human being can undertake, truly begins the journey of individuation. But what does individuation actually mean? Jung was not referring to superficial self-help or minor habit tweaks. He was describing a profound, almost mythic process by which the individual stops merely mirroring the external world family patterns, cultural norms, and others' expectations, and starts becoming what they genuinely are. In essence, individuation is the movement towards psychic wholeness the moment you cease living as others expect and begin responding to what your soul asks of you. This process is neither linear nor comfortable, quite the contrary. It demands facing all that has been repressed, overlooked, or denied within. At this stage, what Jung termed the personal unconscious comes to the surface. Unresolved traumas, stifled desires, and inherited beliefs that were never examined. Individuation commences the moment you stop running from these elements and choose to integrate them. Yet, this is only the opening movement, because the most exacting phase of individuation, and perhaps its most painful, arrives with the encounter with the shadow, that dark, instinctive, animalistic, and chaotic dimension you were taught to conceal. It includes the anger you never voice, the envy you deny, and the impulses you find shameful. Jung said, "Those who look outside dream, those who look inside awaken." And looking inside means facing your shadow without masks, without excuses, without moralism. This matters because an unexamined shadow can govern your life without your awareness. If, however, it is integrated, it becomes a reservoir of power, authenticity, and vital energy. A truthful life begins only when you cease warring with yourself and make peace with all that lives within. Individuation is precisely this rebuilding inner unity, reconnecting with the self, the regulating center of the psyche, and realizing the living wholeness you already carry in potential. Here lies the central irony. While the outer world insists, you must improve. Jung insisted you must become whole, not more perfect, but more real, not better adapted, but genuinely free. The healing you long for is not about squeezing yourself more neatly into the world's mold. It is about aligning your inner world with the truth of who you are. The path can feel solitary and demanding, yet it is the only one that confers lasting meaning. When you begin living from your center, everything shifts. Your decisions shift, your relationships evolve, and even your experience of pain transforms. Suffering stops functioning as punishment and becomes an element within a deeper transformation. Yet an inevitable question emerges. Why do so many remain far from this journey? Why do countless people stay anesthetized, recycling the same patterns and evading a confrontation with their own souls? The explanation returns us to the core of modern suffering, a deficit of meaning, a quiet epidemic that erodes even those who appear outwardly well. That will be our focus in the next section. Your pain may not be the problem itself. It may be the symptom of a deeper reality that up to now your life lacked a clear purpose. This, however, can and must change. Pause and observe the people around you. How many seem to be merely existing rather than truly living? How many move through automatic routines defined by hollow obligations, surface-level diversions, and a fatigue no amount of sleep can cure? Jung recognized that this suffering was not incidental. It was structural and deeply existential. In his view, much of modern psychological pain stems from a stark and unsettling realization life has shed its meaning. By meaning, we do not refer to some grand cosmic mission or unreachable utopia. We mean a personal purpose, a living alignment between what one does and who one is, an existence steered by inner truth, rather than external demands from a world that idolizes success while exhausting the soul. Jung observed in his patients that the most severe symptoms, anxiety, depression, apathy, and anguish, often receded when a meaningful life began to take shape, not when people relied on medication or increased their income, but when they discovered a compelling why. At a deep level, you can bear almost any pain if you understand the reason you are living. Without such meaning, even the strongest pleasures turn bland, and even the most ambitious goals ring hollow. This is precisely our current condition, an epidemic of emptiness. People are exhausted not only by too many tasks, but by too little purpose, lives crowded with commitments, yet impoverished in direction. Jung recognized that human beings need to belong to something larger than themselves. We need to sense that our existence carries weight, consequence, and meaning. Otherwise, we begin to collapse from within. Pain devolves into confusion, and the soul calls out for direction, while the world supplies only distractions, likes, and endless shows, shiny self-help claims, productivity hacks, and so-called miraculous programs, all aimed at filling a void that only truth can fill. And that truth is stark. Many are living lives they did not choose, steered into paths that satisfy others while quietly betraying them. Internally, many end up in professions that fail to reflect their convictions or deepest values. They remain in relationships that slowly deplete their strength. They settle in cities whose pace and atmosphere feel stifling. They repeat daily routines that little by little erase their sense of self. The consequences are embodied. The body registers the strain, the mind buckles under pressure, and the soul contracts upon itself. For an absence of meaning, there is no pharmaceutical cure. What is lacking is not merely serotonin, but a compass direction. It is not simply dopamine, but something more fundamental: identity. At this juncture, Jung's depth psychology becomes urgent, because his aim was never merely to restore functionality. He wanted people to live with authenticity, to cultivate the courage to declare, "This life is not mine, and I will not continue along this path." But how can one do this in practice? How does a person begin to rebuild meaning when the surrounding world appears meticulously arranged to pull attention away from essence? Jung offered a response: reconnection with the unconscious. In those neglected, forgotten chambers of the self lies the key to purpose. That is precisely what we will examine next. How the unconscious, far from being solely a storehouse of trauma, can emerge as your strongest ally in the work of healing. Perhaps the thing you most resist confronting is exactly what must be discovered for a truly meaningful life to begin. Most people profess a desire to heal, yet very few are prepared to pay the real cost of healing. Contrary to popular promises, genuine transformation does not start with upbeat affirmations or a simple list of new habits. It begins with confrontation, with a deliberate plunge, a descent into the deeper layers of one's own soul. This is exactly the lesson Carl Jung emphasized. There can be no lasting healing without an encounter with the unconscious. But what precisely is the unconscious for Jung? It was far more than a container of repressed memories or archived wounds. It is an entire symbolic universe, expansive and alive, holding the parts of us that were forgotten, denied, or abandoned, our most authentic impulses, our most primal fears, and our most difficult truths. Everything you attempted to set aside resides there, waiting to be acknowledged. Why does any of this matter? Because the aspects you refuse to face in the unconscious start to shape your life outside your awareness. Jung put it plainly: what you do not bring to consciousness returns as fate. You might believe you are unlucky in love, while unconsciously recreating the same relational patterns. You may feel undermined at work, even as an unrecognized fear of success steers your choices. You may see yourself as a victim of circumstance, when in fact, unhealed long-standing traumas are quietly directing your behavior. The unconscious functions like a darkened mirror. It reflects who you are in essence, not the idealized image you prefer. This is frightening because it exposes painful truths. It strips away the protective masks you built to endure. It asks you to relinquish the fantasy of control and accept the complexity within. Yet here lies the paradox. Healing is found in precisely this encounter. The more you refuse the unconscious, the more it exerts control, reactivity, rises impulses take over, and the personality fractures. Conversely, the more you integrate its contents, the more coherent and whole you become. Jung named this the expansion of consciousness, a process that begins only when you stop fleeing and begin to listen. How does one proceed? By engaging with dreams, symbols, creative expression, silence, meditation, and analysis. The unconscious does not communicate in linear logic. It speaks in images, sensations, and emotions that appear to emerge from nowhere. But this nowhere is not empty. It is you. It is the part of you that was locked away, awaiting recognition. When you begin to heed this dimension of yourself, something shifts. Self-perception clarifies choices, make more sense. Wounds can be embraced, and above all, personal power is reclaimed. As long as you remain unaware of what lives within you, are held hostage by other people, by your past, by expectations, by the larger culture. A courageous descent into the unconscious begins to loosen those chains. You come to recognize that the anxiety which immobilizes you is not an adversary, but a signal. That the sadness which visits is not a defect, but an indication that some form must end for a new form to arise. This work is demanding. It requires time, patience, and depth. It asks you to forego the comfort of staying at the surface. Yet it is the only path that reliably yields authenticity. From that authenticity, you reconstruct your life, not as a puppet of hidden forces, but as a conscious author of your own path. Are you beginning to author your life from the inside out? Comment 1. If you've tried practices like journaling dreams or active imagination. Comment 2. If you're curious but haven't started yet. With the central place of the unconscious in both suffering and transformation now clearer, a final question arises: what keeps you from beginning this journey? Why do so many, even with awareness, remain frozen, living on autopilot and repeating the same hollow patterns? The root is fear. Fear of change, fear of loss, fear of releasing what is familiar, even when it is harmful. In the concluding part, we will address this fear and the most difficult yet liberating decision required to stop squandering your life. In the end, the choice is stark: remain anesthetized or awaken. There is no middle path. When you accept that there is no middle path, the next question is deceptively simple. What does awakening actually look like between breakfast and bedtime? Jung would say it begins by creating a temenos, a protected inner space, where the ego can safely meet the unconscious without collapsing into it. Practically, this means adopting a symbolic life rather than waiting for enormous cinematic breakthroughs. Keep a dream journal by your bed and write before the day's noise arrives. Practice active imagination for 10 quiet minutes, letting an image from a dream or a recurring fantasy speak back to you. Notice the figures who visit child-sage trickster mother and ask what archetypal demand they represent. This is not superstition, it is discipline. You are training perception to hear meaning where habit hears only static. From here, the work gets ethical. Individuation is not a private glow-up. It is a reorganization of responsibility. You begin to withdraw projections, to stop punishing partners, colleagues, or institutions for carrying your unclaimed shadow or your idealized hero. You stop asking the world to mother you and start cultivating the inner mother anima who can soothe, nourish, and set limits. You stop demanding unassailable certainty from authorities and start developing the inner father animus who can discriminate, decide, and act. As these contrasexual energies integrate, relationships change texture. You move from fusion and demand to encounter and choice. Love becomes less a negotiation of needs than a collaboration of centers. Do not be surprised if synchronicities thicken as you proceed. When the psyche is aligned, outer events and inner images begin to rhyme. A line in a book, a chance meeting, a symbol in the city, these arrive like small heralds, not to spare you of decisions, but to confirm that a deeper order is at work as you take them. Treat such events as confirmations, not commands. Individuation increases freedom, not fatalism. Expect grief. Much of what kept you safe must be relinquished roles that won applause, but muffled truth, rituals of productivity that passed for worth, communities organized around avoidance. You will feel temporarily homeless, no longer at ease in the old persona, not yet rooted in the new form. Stay with it. Jung compared development to a spiral. You will revisit old themes, but at higher altitude with more air in the lungs. Measure progress not by mood, but by fidelity. Did you live 1 degree truer today than yesterday? Finally, let action seal insight. Choose one concrete vow that embodies your self's demand. End a false commitment. Begin the study you buried. Set a boundary. Say the unspoken sentence. Individuation is verified in the world. When your outer life begins to carry the shape of your inner center, suffering changes key. It becomes the heat that forges rather than the acid that erodes. And that is the unmistakable sign that awakening has started to become a life. A moment inevitably arrives when a choice must be made, not a casual preference, but the choice. It is the dividing line between who you truly are and who you were trained to be. It determines whether you will carry on with a borrowed, numbed, and hollow existence, or whether you will pledge yourself to the most solemn promise available to a human being, a commitment to your own soul. If you have reached this point, it is unlikely to be accidental. Something within is stirring awake, perhaps a faint whisper, perhaps a full-throated cry, but unmistakably present. This call persists because it arises from the deepest, most genuine, and most vital core of your being. It is the part that rejects the idea that life is nothing more than labor obligations, diversions, and mere survival. It knows without needing perfect explanations that there is more, something waiting specifically for you. Yet it will show itself only if you cultivate the courage to move in the direction of yourself. Carl Jung observed that the greatest privilege of life is to become who you truly are. He also recognized that this is the most frequently avoided path precisely because it asks you to release what is comfortable, predictable, and superficial. It requires meeting profound fears head-on, confronting your own shadows, and interrogating what you were taught to accept as unquestionable truth. That is exactly why the path is sacred, because it transforms, and in doing so, genuinely heals. Many will persist on autopilot, choosing numbness over clarity. They will accumulate possessions, distractions, and approval in the form of likes, even as something within decays in silence. You are not required to become another data point in that pattern. You can choose differently. Choose to stop squandering your existence to awaken from anesthesia and to build a life that carries meaning, a life that is unmistakably your own. This is not an assurance of ease. The path will be painful and at times bewildering. It may require endings and separations. Yet, it will also set you free. There is nothing more potent than a soul that has awakened. When you begin to live in alignment with who you truly are, you develop an inner steadiness. You no longer seek permission. You cease constant comparisons, and you stop dissolving yourself in attempts to satisfy those who may never truly understand you. So here's the question. What must you release in order to begin truly living? What is the lie you continue to tell yourself? Share it below, whether as a short sentence, a confession, or a question. The act of writing itself is already a departure from numbness. It is a small but decisive gesture of presence agency and awakening. And if these words stirred you, if they touched a wound or sparked a flame, then make time for the next video. Not merely as a sequence, but because it matters. Reaching this point means you are prepared to go further to deepen the work. Now more than ever is the moment to continue. What will you actually do next today to move toward yourself? Comment 1 if you're committing to one concrete vow right now. Comment 2 if you want a simple first step to begin. If you'd love to keep receiving more meaningful videos about psychology healing and understanding yourself better, consider supporting the channel by becoming a member. Your registration not only unlocks more valuable content for you, but also gives me the motivation to keep creating and sharing regularly.